The main man, Graham Hunter, good evening, you're very welcome.
Joe, I've missed you. Joe, I've missed you so much. Good to be with you again.
We had a question in earlier on, we were just chewing the fat in here, and it was that dreadful question that you get asked sometimes, and my mind certainly goes blank, so I'm going to fire it your way, given that you are Mr. The Big Interview. Who is the favourite person?
Pal.
Who is the favourite person, your favourite guest on your show that you've interviewed?
Oh, will you stop?
It's the worst.
I need a week's preparation for that kind of stuff. But yeah. Listen, you introed that well. Look, well, I've been surprised. So recently, when I was down with Adam Lallana in Brighton, we were struck by his brilliant articulacy in describing Alexis McAllister. That made the hair stand up. Most recent of all, Martin O'Neill, whereby Martin's so popular. He's been around as a footballer and as a coach for so long. I didn't expect to hear things that stood out as new. It was more like, let's let him be eloquent on themes. No. He told me about being a young Northern Irishman in the Midlands of England in the middle 70s when the campaign from the IRA reached England, and in fact 48 hours before one of the two pubs that were bombed in Birmingham blew up. He'd been in there by total fluke with his brother and a teammate prior to watching a gig in Birmingham, and he'd missed that terrible tragedy by 48 hours, and he spoke about it beautifully. I could go on. Who stands out as the absolute best? One of the ones that will never leave me is Chris Waddle, for two reasons, Joe. And I know you didn't want the Iliad and the Odyssey from me in an hour's worth of answer. I know. But when Chrissy Waddle talked about growing up in Newcastle and having his mum's sister living in Watford, I said to him, I asked him if he remembered watching the World Cup final in 1966. And he said, well, what we used to do to get to TV was my mum and dad had a big motorcycle and a sidecar. And I think it was mum and dad plus three kids, all on the motorbike and in the sidecar. And he said that roads, big main motorways were quite new then, and they genuinely were. So he said they were going at such a slow pace that they used to clamber over one another and change places without stopping on the drive down from, this is he was a tiny kid and two younger siblings, I think, clambering over one another. This genius of the game, this great man of the game. And also from Chris as well, rooming with Gaza, and Gaza going out and buying, crates full of eggs and waiting late at night in the team hotel they were in, because there was what was then quite a new ATM cash machine about, I suppose, but Chris described it as about 35, 40 meters away. And guys would open the window beautifully and just take up the eggs and start pelting whoever's doing the ATM with a couple of egg sniper shots, and then closing the window and pretending nobody was there. And the final one, again, with Chris was him talking about loving particularly Sheffield Wednesday, where Hillsborough was old, the wooden seats would, if you stood up suddenly, the wooden seats would clack. And you could hear hundreds and then thousands. As he took a man on and beat him, you could hear hundreds of wooden seats in his mind going clack, 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 as people stood up going, go on, Chris. And then as he lost his way, as form departed and age caught up with him, he would hear nothing. And he talked about how depressing that was. And, if you gave me the rest of the show, I could give you 70 highlights from the 135, 136 interviews. And all I would close this off by saying is the generosity of people to keep doing this as a favour. And 3 or 4 of our guests involuntarily have been reduced to tears. And the best thing of all, Joe, is a number of listeners who'll say, I've been having a really hard time recently. This must be the same for you with Off the Ball, that people can put their headphones in and lose themselves from their troubles and can feel lifted away from whatever is making them blue. And some people have talked to us outright about having come through depression and needed a place to go in their minds. And the interviews helped them. And, I'll go from now to my grave when Gaz gets me with his egg sniper act. Been grateful for that feedback and that experience.
Yeah, we do get the same correspondence sometimes from listeners, and it's lovely because there are definitely days, as important as sport is, where I drive home thinking, what the hell are we doing here? This is just silly talking about this stuff so much.
Oh, that's because you're a grown-up man. I never do. No, no, no. That's literally because you've got a grown-up mind and the years that we've known each other have established. You got different priorities. I never ever do that. I have better or worse days, but sport is equal in human creation to opera, theatre, cinema, television, ballet. It just is. Sport is equal to and above all of that. Nobody ever said, "Oh, God, I wonder if we should chuck this cinema thing, this opera, this ballet thing," and that flipping it. No, it's much more important to think about deficits and local budget, local council spending. Come on, Joe.
I hear you. I'm not saying we should stop sport. I'm just wondering if I need to talk about Man United's right back of a Tuesday every week. That's all.
I tune in to listen to you doing that.
I listened to that Waddle episode of yours, and it is just so good. And the way he describes Gaza pelting eggs out the window at unsuspecting ATM people is comedic gold. And like, naturally enough, as he said, Gaza's a crack shot. I mean, of course he is. He's Gaza. But,
yeah,
I mean, he doesn't miss.
Yeah. Well, listen, I'll give you a little anecdote now. When I first got a full-time job in the Scottish Daily Mail, having been a freelance for the Sunday Times for a few years, the first tour I was ever sent on was a Rangers tour of Denmark in the summer when they'd incorporated Laudrup and Gascoigne and Gorham was there and Goffinat. So we went on this mad, led by the late Walter Smith and Archie Knox. It was full of, unbelievable hilarity and anecdotes from Walter that would leave you genuinely helpless with laughter. One of the funniest men ever. But in the top of the hotel was a games room, and in those days, flipping it, Joe. Not only did we travel with them, we lived in the same hotel as them, and when it came to nicking up to play pool or table tennis, you could wander in, and if they were playing, you could put your 10 krona down and bags your game, or they would wander in it. I played both Gorham and Gaza at table tennis. And like you say about typically, Gaza was an egg sniper supreme. It was like he had 8 arms at table tennis. It was, I was okay then. I was many years younger. I don't know how many years it is. Is that 27 years younger? I can't count. Another of the things I'm deficient at. But you picked up a bat and you thought, I'll give him a go. I'll make it difficult. I'll put some spin. I'll drop one over the net. Gaza was just everywhere. It was like 8 arms. It was like playing an octopus with skills. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, I'll bet. It's so interesting how the relationship has changed there with journalists and players. And by the way, I will get on to what I want to talk to you about in a moment. But it was striking. Gareth Southgate certainly tried to build a bridge a couple of years ago and felt that might be of benefit. Clearly, his priority is the team. So of benefit to the team, be that it might demystify the scary journalists, or maybe it might soften the criticism that would go in their direction if journalists, they're human beings as well, and they're like, God, I really like Jack Grealish when I play darts with him, so I won't criticise him quite as viciously. Do you think the modern generation have lost out on something by not having a fairly freewheely relationship with journalists, or do you think, they're well away from it, and actually all the blockades that are up now suit the player?
Well, typically, it's neither one nor another. It's a giant big Gordian knot of a problem because you know the answer. And so your listeners are so well educated that, like, your shows in general, across my 21 years talking to you, your shows clinically represent what it used to be like between journalists, broadcasters, and sportsmen and women. Because there's a degree of intimacy, there's a degree of trust. The level of discussions or arguments that you have are not based on polemic. They might get heated, or they might get funny, or the anecdotes might be cutting, or somebody might share something emotionally stirring. But a lot of it is based on trust and mutual respect. And those are the things that have been lost. So it's quite patent if you could wave a magic wand, and I wish we could, and go back to those days, particularly, including the days of my predecessors. It certainly didn't intimacy with sports people, nor the breakdown started in my era. It had begun earlier, but my predecessors particularly enjoyed an extraordinary amount of friendship and knowledge, and players weren't rich, so journalists were viewed as people who could definitely help the profile, help them with sponsors. There weren't agents, which is before my time. There weren't agents, so journalists were used to tap up footballers and managers. And we've lost, certainly we've lost respect, we've lost mutual understanding. Every time I've been, now over many tournaments, I've been in the same hotel or the same airplane as Spain, occasionally with Barcelona, many times with Manchester United. And when you can speak to players and when they see that you're doing the miles and you're working hard, and at 3 a.m, you're loading your massive amount of kit, cameras and lights and tripods and tons of material, and you're sweating and slogging at 3 a.m. to get from flipping, Cape Town to Potchefstroom, their attitude towards you was a little bit enlightened. When training was open, and I know you're talking a little bit more about larking about with them, but when training was open, I spent half an hour talking to Luis Enrique about this 4 or 5 days ago. The idea that you could go in and watch what a coach was attempting to achieve with his drills, and you would just inevitably, when you were a good, bad, or indifferent journalist, you were capable of going away and writing in a far more accurate, educated way about what was being attempted, what the process was before a game came along.
Yeah.
So, but then we crapped in our own feet, didn't we? By every paper sent a journalist who had a big story and a splash story. That was true of journeys. That was true of hotels. But yeah, we've even if we as an industry now can't be trusted to resurrect that level, Joe, not only have we lost out, those who listen or read have lost out, because we used to bring them a far greater degree of intimate access and accuracy and humor, and we were much more human in our description of these people.
I think that's very true, and the lack of access means that we're taking scraps and reading far too much into them. So at the moment, for instance, I haven't seen a single piece, not a single piece, tell me how Graham Potter's training sessions are going. But I have seen several dozen pieces tell me that Graham Potter is too reasonable or too nice or too normal and lacks an ego to be a big manager, because it's just based on this glimpse we get in a press conference or on the touchline. And as a reader, I read these pieces and say, you're giving me nothing here. And that is down to a lack of access. And that example is one of a gazillion day in, day out.
You take me back to what we tried to do in the big interview, and I listen, whether I achieve it or I don't achieve it, it's what I try to do, and I'm writing for ESPN or talking to you or Ger. I said it when I talked about opera and cinema and ballet and TV. Football in itself is deeply fascinating. We now live in an era whereby whether viewers and listeners and fans at games do or don't know more about football or understand more about football, every single one of them thinks they do. Our terminology has changed dramatically over your and my career. The terminology that fans want to use. There are now people who are simply fans, not in our profession, who may well know much more about football tactics or training tactics. And there are all kinds of software packages that really lift their knowledge and their education gigantically. And therefore, like you said about this COD psychology that you will hear 10 a penny on Potter, which you won't know how to differentiate between the one article, which is actually well sourced about his personality or his feelings or what the players feel about him, and the 72 others, which are just guesswork.
Yeah.
Because the real stuff can easily be in there, but how would you tell?
It's true. So to the situation in Spain, which is pretty interesting just now, we have 3 Clásicos in 4 weeks upcoming. 1 in the league and then 2-legged Copa del Rey affair. And the weekend just gone was interesting. On Saturday, the Madrid derby was 1-1, and so Barcelona had the chance to go 10 points clear against lowly Almeria. They lost 1-0. The comments of Xavi jumped out. He said, the defeat leaves me really angry. It was a day to make a statement in the league. There's no excuse. There was no intensity. There was not even a desire to win, and that worries me. So explain what's happening here at Barcelona, if we can say much is happening at all, but they're especially strong comments from Xavi.
Well, first of all, I think that for a 43-year-old manager in his first full season, again, what you talked about what's talked about is worth consideration, because he has done well. He's won a trophy. He's currently 7 points clear. All the things you talked about are completely true. Losing to Almeria for the first time in their history was bad. Madrid had been full of doom and gloom in drawing against 10 men Atleti on the Saturday night. It had been a marvellous opportunity for a flailing Barca, because in recent weeks they've lost a lot of impetus and confidence. Lewandowski is not playing well. Never mind the goals, he's not playing well. Pedri's injured, Dembele's injured. So, focusing on Xavi, his words will prove to have been a little bit injudicious, because they were in the heat of the moment. Sometimes a real tongue lashing can change a dressing room, can make individuals waking up. And it was anger and it was pressure. He's been booked 3 times in recent games, never sent off, but he's been consistently booked. And in the background to what he's trying to do, which is take a squad which was a wasteland when he inherited it in November of 21, he's got them 7 points clear. They've won a trophy. When they won the trophy, they took Madrid to pieces. Over his time, they've beaten Madrid 4-0 at the Bernabeu. They've beaten Napoli. They've beaten Galatasaray. He's in his first 46 Liga games. Xavi has a record which is second best in Barca's history. 3 points less than Luis Enrique, and equal to Pep Guardiola in his first 46 Liga games, which was the season that they were going to. Pep had the vintage Messi, vintage Busquets, vintage Xavi, vintage Iniesta, Busquets, Piqué, Puyol, and they won the treble. And Xavi's stats in his first 46 La Liga games are equal to Pep's, exactly equal. And what you saw at the weekend, I'll split the end of the answer into 2 parts, is the tension of a Xavi who's got a club whereby they're in desperate debt. The financial fair play situation while Xavi's been manager has been hugely embarrassing for him to be able to register players, buy players, go through with promises about renewing contracts for players. That's embarrassing for him, but it's out with his control. La Liga recently told him, you're now another 200 million short of making financial fair play. There was a refereeing scandal erupted where the tax office have given what seems to be pretty clear proof that Barcelona as an institution were paying for information and advice and guidance on referees from a man who was the vice president of the refereeing committee at the FA. So all of this is going on, which is, if it, once proven, is utterly scandalous. Xavi's in the middle of this maelstrom in his first full season in a senior club in Europe, an elite club, with all the pressure that brings. And I think that the words that you're talking, because I heard the inflection of a Carlo Ancelotti eyebrow raise from you, Joe. It was very similar. I think, like, it wasn't just the result. Football can happen, but it was like, WTF, Xavi, baby? What's going on there? Pressure, I think, is the answer. He knows exactly what you've said, that Thursday night is the first leg of the Classico Cup semi-final. It's away. It looks very like, well, Dembele and Pedri won't make it. Lewandowski probably won't make it. And frankly, at the moment, that won't be much loss. And there are several players who, in the training system, which gives you a red light, amber light, green light on your training bib, there are 5 players, including Lewandowski, who are registering red numbers at the moment. And in other words, they shouldn't be playing and training as hard and playing a game every 3 days, which they are at the moment. And that's unavoidable. So they've got problems. They've got really big problems. And what he can imagine coming is, well, if they don't manage to claw out a reasonable result in the Bernabeu, the pressure will go up. The people will utterly forget 7 points advantage in the league. They'll forget the Spanish Super Cup. They'll forget the stats about how his team has still only conceded. I mean, I think it's 8 goals in the league all season, which is the lowest total in any big league in Europe. Those will be chucked out the window. And Joe, I'd ask you and ask your listeners, in a balanced view of what's going on, should they be chucked out the window? Probably not. But we live in a very intemperate now society. And I think he's beginning to show that pressure, because I think he knows that if they could get a spanking on Thursday. They could. Not saying they will, but it's in the wind.
And is the Madrid that we saw at Anfield, not least that second half, where at times they were devastating, is that indicative of an improved Madrid of late, or where are they at the moment as they head towards the final few furlongs in this league race?
Yeah, well, they weren't very good against Atleti until the newest wonder kid, Alvaro Rodriguez. He's a brilliant story. Born in Catalonia, brought up in Catalonia. It looked like Barcelona just didn't see him under their very noses. Instead, what happened was his Uruguayan dad and he himself, Madridistas to the core. They were playing all their football an hour away from Camp Nou and the academy there. And he's like, oh, Madrid, 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 Madrid. Even when he was 14, 15, 16. And Raul has been saying for some time, and now Ancelotti's been saying, look out for this Alvaro. He just came back from finishing runner-up to Brazil in the South American Under-20 Championship, scored 5 goals in the tournament. He comes on the other week with, I think, in the 88th minute, creates a brilliant assist. Valverde has rendered him offside. He creates another brilliant assist 90 seconds later for the second goal for Asensio. And then in his second La Liga game, he comes on against Atleti, leaps as if he's got a step ladder and scores the equaliser. But there was no correlation between the Madrid we saw against Atleti and the Madrid we saw at Anfield. And the danger is not that Madrid are just simply a ramming machine who will render Barcelona into splinters. It's that they are still Pavlovian, as they've been for the best part of my awareness of them on the planet, probably their entire history, but certainly in modern history, post-war history. It's if the bell rings, they come out hungry and they're dangerous. If you give them a workaday game against a smaller side, particularly on a very bad pitch at the Bernabeu, they may stumble. They may look a little bit sluggish. And Anfield, the bell rang, and when it's a Clásico this time, the bell will ring, and they all Barca won for the Super Cup in Saudi Arabia, where they couldn't move physically. They'd been deliberately worked hard by Pintus after the World Cup, because Pintus knew that apart from the gap they got immediately between the end of the World Cup and the early part of January, there would be basically no more fitness training until June. Only maintenance. And therefore, when they last played Barcelona, they were on their knees physically so that they would produce performances like they did at Anfield or like they did against City at home or Chelsea away last season. It was a calculated gamble. And at the moment, I've been using the phrase, when Madrid play the theme tune, Lalo Schifrin's theme tune to Jaws. Because Ancelotti's been telling us for about 3 weeks now, we're coming.
Okay.
And when he says that, you believe him. So
interesting.
It won't be quite Anfield on Thursday night, but it could be something like it, Joe.
Interesting. I'm on a maintenance-only regime as well of late.
You don't look too bad on it now.
Oh, dear. I'm loath to bring up this topic because it's just going to massively bring down the mood. So we'll go there nonetheless, relatively briefly. But Jonathan Liu caught my attention in The Guardian because he is writing about Vinicius and what I suppose now is the ongoing racist abuse he suffers. You and I spoke a number of months ago. It was on the back of a ridiculous television debate, and you were strong in your condemnation of what was being said about Vinicius at that stage. The first a sense I had that this thing was actually becoming an ongoing trend was when somebody asked Jurgen Klopp if there was a provocative aspect to Vinicius's behaviour, as in, was he doing something to deserve racism? And Klopp gave that question the short shrift it deserved. I then heard that during a minute's silence for the victims of the earthquake in Turkey and Syria, that there were isolated shouts very much directed at Vinicius, and I saw Ancelotti coming out to condemn them, amongst others. So this is now extended from whatever flashpoint happened when we spoke a number of months ago into just like this ongoing treatment of this poor young man.
Yeah, I wrote about it, I think, maybe 3 weeks ago for ESPN in my column,
Okay.
and I have never, ever had so much response, so much attention to a column, I think, in my life. I wrote in big angry capital letters that it was unquestionably racist, but what was worse, and Jonathan the other day used the same phrase, that there have been people that either deliberately, and I think most of it is deliberate, or inadvertently, have been not gaslighting him, but trying to convince everybody that it's his fault. And the instant that Vinicius, I mean, I'm a belligerent, aggressive person. So that needs to be taken into context, but I support him in the way that he's become chippy and in people's faces, because two things are happening to him every single weekend, which is there are racist things that are being shouted at him from the stand, and then in domestic football, not in the World Club Championship or in Champions League, where you take your licks and largely it's not targeted. In Spanish football, it's been open season, and the day when he was fouled, I think it was 13 or 14 times against Mallorca, and nobody from Madrid had been fouled that many times for 8 or 9 years. And if you go back to the beginning of the incident with Mallorca, where Maffeo, who's been bitching and moaning about Vinicius' attitude, Maffeo tries to, and go find this. This is the 4-1 win by Madrid in Mallorca last season. Go find it on YouTube, everybody. Maffeo tries to take Vinicius' knee off. And the referee, and it's one of our better referees, ignores it, doesn't give a foul. There's a bit of a hold me back between all the players. Then other players come seeking Vinicius, and the referee turns on him because he's reacted by now about a minute and a half, 2 minutes after the original foul, for which the player isn't booked, and a throw-in is given, and Vinicius ends up getting booked. Now, I'm not Madridista. It's just as plain as your eyes that this is a concerted campaign whereby people on the pitch are taking advantage of the general lack of action against racism, virulent, naked, nasty racism, in thinking, well, here's an opportunity. If we kick him or bully him or poke him or say something to him, the chances are he'll be sent off. And initially, Real Madrid's players weren't taking it seriously. And lately, they've been rallying around him. When Gabriel Paulista tried to kick Vinicius out of the Bernabeu stands, it was brilliant. Rodrigo was on him in an instant. Camavinga was on him in an instant. Militao had been taken off. And listen, people can like or not like my Charles Bronson, Avenger type vigilante behaviour. But my perspective is, if it gets to that behaviour with violence that can ruin your season, your career, and racism, then you take one of ours, we take 6 of yours. That's my point of view. I shouldn't be editorializing, but that's the point of view I come from. Militao went looking for Gabriel Paulista as he came off the pitch from his red card. I was like, show the world that you support Vinicius, teammates. And they have been. And then they started doing it in press conferences and post-matches, mixed zones. Thankfully, at last. And therefore, the debate is changing a little bit. White players are saying that Vinicius has been picked up. Oh, well, in that case, maybe we better discuss it differently. It's atrocious. I read Jonathan's piece. I think, personally, it's far worse than he described. And he made a broader point about society. But for my taste, it's beyond disgusting. It's verging towards the worst racism I ever saw, which was a cup game between Madrid and Atleti, and I phoned Sky. I phoned off the ball and I phoned Sky to say, this is what's going on. Let's make a massive issue of this, where the Atleti's fascist Nazi Frente Atletico were left behind in the stadium as a security measure. And when Marcelo and his kid came out to warm down, he took his kid, who's now a junior, the abuse he was given was just, it was jailable, all of it. And it was just as if, well, this is what happens. And it's going on again. And there's very little individuals can do except put a spotlight on it and say, this is wrong, this is this is a campaign, and keep ringing that bell until something happens. It just makes me, that it's happening makes me furious with anger. And that so many ordinary people are going, well, it's because he's provocative. Well, I'll provoke you in a second. Honestly, I've had to restrain myself. I'm bunching my fists right now on television programs, in public, listening to the bull that people speak about it. Joe.
Vinicius, people will remember his Instagram post a number of months ago calling this out. You said he's been chippy. Has that been a general chippiness? Does he speak about this on a regular basis?
No, it's because when they're kicking the lumps out of him, he's beginning to go back in their faces.
Okay.
And you're like, John Giles is one of the linchpins of your output. When John was targeted, John went out and went, I tell you what, I'm not having that. Here's one back. Infamously. And I grew up in that era, and I will not say, if referees say to Vinicius, see when that guy kicked you and then you punched him, I'm sending you off as well. Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's right. But if because he's getting lippy or he's getting in the face of people who are trying to kick his legs off his body, that the debate in society and in some of the media is, oh, well, look, you see, he's bringing it upon himself. No, that's not how it began. So when I say chippy, it's because he is not willing to take it. And I see no reason why he should. Frankly, if I'm honest, the day when he does what Zidane did to Materazzi or Cantona did to that, BNP support at Selhurst Park, and he bunches his fist and knocks somebody flat or, splatters their nose all over their face, I'll understand and I'll say, listen, take your punishment, mate. Punishment's coming, but fair enough. Them's the rules. If you want to transgress normal rules of society that much on the pitch, then you take your medicine. Sorry, that's what I feel.
No. Final thought, and this is far less important, so we'll draw a line under previous conversation. Yeah. It's not an easy segue out of that. Casemiro. I presume there's a general awareness that he's in the running for Player of the Year and he's having a glorious season. It's so interesting, Casemiro. I count myself probably in the majority who did not realise this guy was so brilliant. And when we talked about Modric and Kroos, it was always Casemiro third. And, it was, he's good and he's part of that midfield tree. Graham Souness, when he signed, he's a steady Eddie. Good player, steady Eddie. That was a perception. Man, he's blown me away. Were you always aware? Was he always this good? Was he always this rounded a player? Or is he almost flourishing as being the main man in a midfield now?
No, for years I've been writing about the fact that he's massively intelligent, that he is 10 times the footballer he was ever given credit for, because he's clearly athletic and a physical specimen, but his football brain has been... So I'm like you, but in reverse. I own up that I wrote a column saying how broken-hearted I was not to be seeing him every week, because every single week was an education. To be a co-commentator in a game that Casemiro was playing in was a joy. Where I fell down was I did not see Manchester United repairing themselves quickly enough to be at his level. And I genuinely thought it was like, no, mate, you could have been doing... And I was wrong, because they've got the daily standards right. Ten Hag's ideas are right. His coaching staff has done well. They've changed the squad sufficiently. Enough players that are new have hit their marks. Rashford turned up in the summer. It isn't recently. Turned up in the summer with a completely different attitude. And I was short of understanding about United. In terms of Casemiro, I was just devastated that we wouldn't be seeing the last 4 or 5 years of his career in La Liga. And I miss him still. I'm thrilled that he's getting his recognition.
Yeah.
And recently, 3-4 weeks ago, I did with my sponsors, they were arguing who's the player of this. Yeah, and it was Haaland outside. I was like, no, I think it will. I think it can be, and I think it may well be Casemiro, because he is an absolute... He's a rascal. An absolute rascal. He knows every single trick. And I could not, having seen him hundreds of times, tell you how it is that he continually makes himself invisible to referees. However, his football brain is sensational. I'm fortunate enough to have interviewed him, and it all comes through to bright man, real visionary on the pitch. And good luck, bloody Premier League. Good luck, Manchester United. I wish he was still here, Josh. Makes me so angry. Not Vinicius angry, but still angry.
Well, I hear you. Because it's just, I in the... Not to pick someone out unfairly, but in the guise of Schweinsteiger coming to a dysfunctional Manchester United and it just being meh, I thought, well, Casemiro's coming to dysfunctional United. He's 30. It's a good paycheck. This will be meh. He's so hungry. I mean, he's celebrating winning a tackle.
Do you know that George, you know the thing that's beautiful then is that he went to Madrid and said, I have to be challenged again. I have to. He wanted to go. I have no doubt he'll be being paid more. None. However, he expressed it to Madrid. He kick-started the process. And when he expressed it to Madrid, he was like, I need a new challenge.
Okay.
Now, heavens above, for him to do that when neither Modric or Kroos have needed a new challenge, nor Courtois nor Benzema. And understandably, when they might hunt down Barcelona and win the title again. They don't tend to retain the title for many years. What were they last season? They were European and Spanish champions last summer, right? But my memory tells me that was only the second time Madrid have achieved that since 1958. Real Madrid to be jointly Spanish and European champions twice in 60-something years. And Casemiro needs a new challenge. Instead of like, we'll do this again. So when you see him ticking off Bruno for being selfish at the end of the final, or pumping his fist at a tackle, that bit, I'm not surprised at all. Level of playing, not surprised at. I go again, and mea culpa, I admit, I didn't think United would be ready for him.
Interesting. I did not know he agitated. I had just presumed they looked at Camavinga, and then in a very Arsene Wenger-esque way, they had preempted his rapid decline and said, Casemiro.
He asked to go, and they didn't want. They loved the amount of money they got because it helps with their FFP2, but it was his move.
Wow.
And boy, any profession, when somebody's at the top and says, "I need something new," listen. My favorite artist is Paul Weller, who's like, don't tell me about the Jam and Style Cancer. Don't tell me about 2 albums ago. I'm moving on. Something new, baby. Don't ask for greatest hits. That's Casemiro.
We are out of time. Thank you so much.